Okay.
Okay, we all ready?
Yeah, people are coming in now.
Are they able to hear us?
They will be able to.
Okay.
We're ready to go when you are, Duncan.
Great. So welcome everybody to this second in our series of webinars. It's nice to see so many people, and it's great to have three excellent speakers joining us this afternoon. The title of this seminar is about local resilience capability. And by the local resilience capability, we're very much thinking about community resilience and thinking about what does the next step on look like from COVID. So during COVID, we've seen an outpouring of compassion and outpouring of activity from our communities, both from individuals who would previously be sitting at home volunteering, businesses coming to the fore and providing support to their local or their national supply base and consumer base. And really we've seen community groups, the voluntary sector, all coming together to provide a really well-coordinated response. We've seen local government having a role to play in that, both in terms of creating their own volunteer arms, as well as national government providing information and providing guidance on what all of this looks like and how all of this can play out. And at the university, we've been thinking very much about what does the future look like? How do we make sure that this goodwill does not get lost? How do we maintain this momentum? And community resilience is obviously key to that. And one of the challenges perhaps with community resilience is that it is quite a difficult concept to pin down. And so we've been thinking about how can we pin it down around capabilities and thinking about local resilience capabilities as being all of the parts that I've just been talking about. And how can we keep those going? How can we keep them coordinated? How can we keep them motivated and contributing towards the local resilience of our areas? A few weeks ago, the integrated review was published, and that made it very clear that resilience at home is going to be a key part of what the UK will be looking for over the coming months and years. And local resilience, we believe, forms a very important role in that, both individuals, businesses, and today we've got a series of speakers who will talk to each aspect of this. So we have from Chile, Fernando is going to talk about the role of youth in creating resilience in our communities. Suu-Va will talk about community groups and how Cert, as the emergency response teams in America, really come to the fore, really come and provide resilience through community members. And Hannah's going to talk about some of the work of BITC, Business in the Community, and the really crucial role that businesses play and organizations can play in gelling communities together. So this webinar is the beginning of a series of 12, and over the course of the coming year we will continue to deliver these webinars and continue to exchange ideas around how we can build this local resilience capability, all under the auspices of the ESRC project that we're running on building community and local resilience capabilities. So I would like to invite you all to listen to the speakers as well as contribute to the conversation through the chat function. The chat function will hopefully give you an opportunity to ask questions of the speakers. The speakers will speak for around about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have the opportunity to listen to some discussion between them and responding to your questions. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, who is Fernando from Inhoove. So Fernando is the National Director of Volunteer Programs at Inhoove, and Inhoove is the National Youth Institute that is part of Chile's Ministry of Social Development and Families. I first met Fernando when we were in Chile together, and we were conducting a peer review and looking at some of the amazing work that they were doing of spontaneous volunteers, and in particular how they had involved 1,000 volunteers in response to the Valparaiso wildfires. And since then, I know that INHOV has done an amazing work around developing a spontaneous volunteers capability, and look forward to hearing from Fernando around what youth can bring to the community resilience, to local resilience capabilities. So Fernando, I invite you to share your screen of your slides, and I hand over the floor to you and for around 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
I can hear you and
Yes.
see you, Fernando. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Duncan. It's nice to see you again. Hello, everyone. My name is Fernando Padilla. I am the director of the volunteer program of the National Youth Institute for the government of Chile. Today, I'm going to share a little bit of our work related to the youth volunteering and community resilience in Chile, applied to the disaster and the responses COVID-19. About volunteering in Chile and our volunteer program Transforma País. About us, the acronym INHOV means Chile's National Youth Institute, that belongs to the Ministry of the Social Development and collaborates with the government in the designing, planning, and coordinating policies and programs for the youth affairs. INHOV also focuses his work with young people from 15 to 29 years old. And this government organization has a national headquarters and 16 regional offices along of our 4,300 kilometers of the national territory, surrounded by the Andes Mountain and the Pacific Ocean. And a small summary of volunteer ecosystem in Chile tell us that 85% of young people has a high interest in participating, but 28% have volunteered. And to the other side, the 68% of NGOs consider volunteering as an essential activity for their programs. And these schemes is our volunteer cycle of the volunteer program. We have designed a philosophy to transform our country, promoting the volunteer as a strategic tool to invite the youth to become a protagonist of the social changes in their communities and territories. So the structure of this route have three important ingredients: the working, the organization, plus young volunteers, and a platform to connect them, the action related to the different kind of activities for youth, such as an environmental, social, culture, humanitarian, among others, that pretends to involve with SDGs from the 2030 agenda from UN. And the last one, it's about learning experience with our volunteer academy to develop skills and competencies for the challenge of the 21st century for youth. For us, it's very important to cultivate a volunteer ecosystem to harvest a culture of the young volunteering in Chile. For that, we have permanent volunteer teams and a network with organizations in all regions, and an online volunteer platform which connect with the interest of youth to participate and the offer of activities for the organizations. About management scheme for disaster that we have worked. First, for the volunteer process, we articulate between INHUB National Office with the INHUB Regional Office. And first of all, we have to evaluate the assessment of the disaster zone to see the feasibility to work with volunteers. So we minimize the risk and won't interrupt the work of the first responses emergency teams. Second, we establish a volunteers reception center. The third, the coordination with local network, the civil protection system, and local volunteer ecosystem. And fourth, with delivery of PPE and permanent training to volunteer and task assignment in case of response. Here we have some examples in Chile for the responses on disaster and emergencies and the work of the INHUB coordinating volunteer action with youth. This is the forest fire in Torres del Paine. This is the most famous national park in Chile, where volunteers collaborate with the restoration of the touristic infrastructure and plant thousands of native species, for example. Then we have the Great Fire of Valparaiso. This city is classified as UNESCO World Heritage, where volunteers cleared debris and built emergency housing. And other examples such as Atacama floods and mud floods, the mega fire in the south and central zone of Chile, and the last response for floods and landslides in the mountain town of the San Jose de Maipo in February of this year, and included to COVID-19 context. So it wasn't easy. It was very hard to work there, but we try this experience with the volunteers. And third, about volunteer response to COVID-19. Last year, INHUB developed 3 lines of action to respond to COVID-19. The regional and local initiatives, the Yo Te Ayudo program, and the training for youth volunteers. First, the regional volunteer projects, the process consider on the selection criteria, the safety protocols, the impact and the remote activities priority, and the execution stage. The route include, among others, the admissibility of volunteers, the training against COVID-19, special logistic, of course, and personal protection elements, and an evaluation of the projects. Some examples of the activities that made volunteers. Volunteers have to build, for example, a face mask for health heroes and delivery to some hospital in Valparaiso region. They made a portable sink and volunteer actions in prevention of COVID-19 in the community, giving information about the correct use of the mask, the social distance, and the hands washing in Maule region, and why not the entertainment for activities for youth, having a better time staying at home in quarantine time in a new region. This second program, Yo Te Ayudo, means Can I Help You program. This mobilized 315 young volunteers to help the urgent needs of quarantine seniors, solving more than 2,000 cases related with purchased food, the medicines, and the digital procedures. And the final, about training and develop, the final initiative, one of the most important was to train our volunteers, of course. So we have to create a volunteer in COVID-19 times manual and a guideline and an online course for organization and volunteers to help cope with the pandemic. These are these 3. And this is my presentation. Thank you very much for listening and the invitation. We are delighted to share with you a little of our experience of the National Youth Institute of Chile and try to promote the resilience as an frequently practice for young people and create a better country through the volunteer experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernando. I think it's amazing that through youth you're having this tremendous impact. And I think what we've done obviously in the UK is we've had a similar outpouring and support from volunteers, but not that focus, that clear focus that INHOOF have on youth. And that's certainly a lesson that we learned when we were over in Chile, and perhaps something that we need to think about going into the future is how can we really tap into that tremendous resource that's there. So I know that many of you will have questions for Fernando about how this is happening in Chile, and I wonder if you could maybe put those into the chat function. In the meantime, I'd like to just thank Fernando again and
thank you, Duncan.
And introduce Suu-Va Tai. Suu-Va is the state administrator for the Cert program in California, and he is the president of the National Cert Association. Many of you on this webinar will have heard of Cert and will be amazed at the sorts of things that it can do, working through community members and training them up in a very systematic and convincing way that means that they can integrate in with emergency services almost seamlessly. And Suu-Va, I'm very pleased to welcome you to talk about some of the work you've been doing, and so we can learn more about Cert. Suu-Va, I can see your slides. I wonder if you could just do an audio check, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Excellent. Over to you, Suu-Va.
Great, thank you, Duncan. So yes, I'm going to talk about the Community Emergency Response Team. This is a program and one of the more prominent volunteer programs in the United States that's attached to typically a public safety agency. I'm going to skip the slide about myself since Duncan did a great job giving me an introduction. So what is CERT? CERT is 20 hours of disaster preparedness training at its core. It teaches the participants a couple of main key skills: fire safety, life search and rescue, team organization, disaster medical operations. The nice thing about CERT is it's a standard curriculum. So there are 3,000 programs in the United States and hundreds of CERT programs throughout the world, and all of them teach a similar type of curriculum. And at the space, once again, it teaches an individual how to keep themselves, their family, and the people around them safe during a disaster, and how to treat light injuries. Here's an overview of the timeline of the CERT program. It was created in 1985, making it about 36 years old now. It was created in a fire department in Los Angeles following a huge earthquake in New Mexico and also earthquakes in Japan. And in those earthquakes, many community members died trying to rescue other community members during these major earthquakes. They would go into buildings when buildings were collapsing above them. They would go into major holes and make themselves victims that public responders had to go and help instead of just being helpers. Once the program was created, and typically in the United States, fire departments work really well with each other and they present programs that they've created. And so when fire departments around the US saw this program being created, they adopted a similar type program. In 1994, FEMA saw that this was a great program to make available nationwide. They took the curriculum from the city of LA and standardized it. It made it more applicable nationwide and created a standard curriculum. In 2002, 1 year following the 9/11 attacks, the United States funded a program called Citizen Corps, and it funded many volunteer programs that communities could create to make themselves safer. And it added a lot of funding, and it earmarked funding so that it was specifically designed just for these programs. So communities had the opportunity to spend funding to start these programs. Unfortunately, in 2011, that funding went away, the dedicated funding went away. And local government had to decide if this was going to be something they wanted to fund. Very similar to how you would balance your budget. If you say, hey, we have to have money for gas every single week, then you're going to set aside money and you don't spend past that your budget amount. But if you decide, hey, we are making less money now, we're going to have to decide what we want to spend money on, you might run out of money for gas. You might decide that you take the bus or some other cheaper mode of transportation. And so unfortunately, many communities had this downsizing of the Cert program, but there's still 3,000 programs nationwide. And now the Cert program has adopted to be a lot less costly and more effective and easier to start up. The key aspects of Cert training is that one, it is classroom-based training. So participants go into a classroom, typically at a fire station, a police station, or a community center to take this training. It is led by instructors, typically a minimum of 2 instructors. There's hands-on skills training. So when they talk about fire safety, they will show you a fire extinguisher and tell you how to read a fire extinguisher. They will allow the participants to hold the fire extinguisher and practice pulling the pin, and they're going to practice putting out a live fire. At the end of the training, there's a disaster simulation where they put together all the training that you have taken and put you through a scenario so that you learn how to work with each other in teams and how to put your skills that you learned into action. A couple of years ago, the state of Utah developed a hybrid training which incorporated independent online study. So they replaced the lecture portion with online computer study. And FEMA approved that training because they reviewed it and saw that it included all the elements that were needed to make sure that the participants knew how to react during a disaster. And because of the pandemic, we have kind of rolled this training nationwide, and about 35 states of the 50 states in the United States now have used this training. So once again, Cert training is 20 hours. It covers 8 main topics. The first topic is disaster preparedness. So this is generally an overview of the disasters that are likely to happen in a community and what local government does during a disaster and what you can expect as a community member and what community members should do to prepare themselves, what kind of safety equipment they should have, what kind of training they should give themselves and their family, how to put together a kit and all of that stuff. The next thing is Cert organization. So teaching the participants, if a disaster happened, how to leverage the people around them to work as a team to do different functions. Very similar to public safety in the incident command system that is used. How fire works with police, works with EMS, and works with local government. We also teach community members how to work with each other to do all these different functions at the local level. About half of the Cert programs also retain a cadre of volunteers so that they can use them as a disaster response team. And during this module, they'll also talk a little bit about how that team can work with public safety as well. The next module is disaster medical operations. So we teach the triage, how to quickly assess individuals to see how injured they are and who needs to be treated first, how to treat light bleeding and shock, bandaging, splinting, and those kind of skills. Disaster psychology is also something that's taught, how to interact with individuals during a disaster who have experienced trauma, especially psychological trauma, what to say to individuals, and how to make them feel better during a disaster. We also teach how to talk to your fellow team members because a lot of times when you're responding, it's hard to see yourself how you're being affected, but we want to teach people how to recognize that in their teammates so that they can make sure that they get treatment as well. As I mentioned, we teach fire suppression, and we actually make sure that you practice with live fire. We teach a buddy system in Cert to make sure that if there are other individuals, you work in teams as opposed to working alone, and how to use calling out, using your voice to communicate with each other, how to hold on to each other, because in a fire situation, there could be quite a bit of smoke. We also teach when to walk away. So we're not teaching people to be firefighters, not to react to every single situation around them. Make sure that they are safe, how to size up the situation and see whether or not they should respond or they should walk away and call first responders immediately. We teach utility controls, and this is very important, how to shut off gas and water if necessary during a disaster, where to look around your home or apartment building or office to look for utilities and practice shutting it off. Oftentimes, the local utility company will come out and do this training, and they will teach anything specific to their jurisdiction. We teach life search and rescue, how to assess a building to make sure it is safe to enter, how to mark your building so that you can show first responders what has been searched, and also if there's any survivors that are left inside the building that needs to be rescued. We teach you how to evacuate individuals if you're by yourself, if you're in a team, or if the individual is paralyzed or have back injuries, how to evacuate them safely as well. The last module is Cert and terrorism, how to recognize terrorism, and basically just to call the authorities if you see something suspicious. We do not teach individuals to react to terrorism, to stop terrorists, or anything like that. We also teach how to recognize hazardous signs, placards, and what those different levels mean, and obviously to walk away whenever you see a hazardous sign. In addition to the core modules in Cert, we also have hazard annexes, and this really allows the local program to customize the training specifically to their disasters that they are high risk for. So this is a list of the different annexes that we have. To start a Cert program, you need a couple of core things. One is you need a program manager that can really run their program, and this program manager is in charge of recruiting the participants and students, recruiting instructors, classroom setup, finding a classroom and the equipment and supplies necessary to run the program and to deliver training. Cert is also public knowledge in the United States, meaning that you can go to the FEMA's website and it's ready.gov/cert, and you can download all the course materials. So you can download the instructor guide and participant materials so you can teach Cert training. There is a trainer course that teaches instructors to better prepare themselves to teach the training. There's also a program manager course that covers kind of the core pieces of how to deliver Cert training. So all of that is available on FEMA's website. FEMA does allow for anyone throughout the world to teach Cert, but to be recognized officially by FEMA, if you're outside the country, that requires a MOU, kind of an agreement with that country that they'll be teaching Cert to a certain capacity, and including all the modules. And in the United States, to be recognized as a program, you have to ensure that you're teaching all the modules using qualified instructors, and either all classroom-based training or utilizing the hybrid Cert training that's been approved. For the Cert training, it is 20 hours long, but some programs will do it 3 days in a row, or they'll alternate the days. So maybe they'll do every other Saturday for 3 weekends. Or they'll do 3 hours a night for 8 weeks. So it really depends on the program. It's roughly 20 hours to deliver all the materials, but depending on how qualified your instructors are and how big your participant size is, you can teach it in about 18, or some programs will take 30 hours because they do a lot more training and cover a lot more detail. As I mentioned, half of the programs in the United States are train and release, meaning that they're really just offering the opportunity for community members to learn how to be disaster prepared and how to react during a disaster. And there's no ties or commitments to the volunteer or to the program afterwards. However, half the programs do create a cadre of volunteers for preparedness activities as well as disaster response activities. And it's an option for the participants once they take the training to be part of that cadre. It's never mandatory, so you don't have to commit yourself in order to get the training. It's always going to be an option, as well as an option for the program. Some programs do hand select the volunteers to make sure that they have volunteers who are more qualified, understand the training more qualified for the activities they would likely use them for, and more passionate about the training. During blue skies, which is what we call the times where there's no disasters, Cert volunteers can help with preparedness presentations, going to schools, libraries, churches, businesses, and doing either 10-minute presentations or 1-hour presentations, or even some training and little elements of the Cert training. They can staff preparedness booths, and they can, once again, do outreach in the community. These are the main disasters or activities that Cert volunteers help out with: shelter operations, donation management, points of distribution, handing out safety supplies, traffic control. They help out in the Emergency Operations Center. They can do radio communications, do damage assessment, sandbagging during floods and heavy rain, and rescue operations. In California last year, 123 programs reported that they did COVID-19 related activities for the local community. A total of about 9,000 different volunteers in the state of California supported through the Cert program, and almost 60,000 total hours of volunteer service for COVID support. And that's a huge asset in the state of California last year. COVID activities include working at food pantries, delivering food, staffing town hall meetings, and passing out educational materials, helping at testing sites, as well as currently vaccine sites, helping with call center support, calling community members and letting them know about COVID-19 safety precautions and where they can get support and resources, distributing the personal protective equipment for COVID, and creating the different masks as well. Really quickly, the hierarchy in Cert. So FEMA is our Federal Emergency Management Agency. They own the Cert program and is in charge of standardizing the curriculum. The states have a coordinator, making sure that they vet the programs and offer technical assistance. And the local programs actually, local organizations that create the program actually own the program. So beyond how to teach the Cert training and what is safe, FEMA and the state really does not dictate how a program utilizes the Cert program or how often they do training. Lastly, once again, UK, if you're part of a program, you're welcome to go to FEMA's website, download the materials, and you can start teaching parts of it yourself. If UK wants to be more structured in how they want to bring the Cert program to the UK, they can either work with FEMA or the National Cert Association, and we can offer assistance and training on how to do that. Thank you.
That's great, Suu-Va. Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting, and every time I hear about Cert, I keep thinking that it's something that we really need to start thinking about. How do we land it in the UK in the right way? And I know that there might be people who are on this webinar who are thinking about the implications that it might have for their own local area. And so please do feel free to get in touch and we can certainly explore that. But to hear that Cert emerged out of the earthquake of 1985, obviously we have COVID very present at the moment, and whilst there might be little positive that will emerge out of COVID, perhaps one of the legacies can be the new recognition that we can put on community resilience, on local resilience capability, and building on some of the really strong work that's already happening across the UK and finding out how we can embed that in. So thank you very much indeed again, Suu-Va, for contributing that, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on that. I wonder if I can maybe move on to our last speaker for this afternoon, Hannah Tankard. Hannah is the emergency lead at Business in the Community. And when we think about our communities, very often we think about the individuals, the community groups, the voluntary sector. But in our project, we're absolutely clear that business forms such a key role in providing the glue that brings communities together, whether it's the local corner shop, whether it's a major employer, whether it's an organisation that provides services to the community. And Hannah has been working in BITC, really bringing together and supporting organisations during COVID. And so I'd like to hand over to Hannah, and I can see your slides, Hannah. And let me just do an audio check.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can do.
Great.
Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Duncan. And I absolutely agree. I do believe we should also be implementing some form of Cert here. I'd also be keen to know how we can do that. Anyway, moving on. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be here because I fundamentally believe that to have true community resilience, the private sector does have to be involved. And I'm delighted to share with you some of my thoughts and observations from the last year of what the private sector has achieved and also what we as Business of the Community have done to support community resilience at the local level. So just by way of an agenda, I just thought I'd give you a brief introduction into who Business in the Community are or is. I'm aware that some people don't necessarily know who we are, especially if you're internationally based. Some of my key observations, and then, like I said, BITC's response to COVID-19. So who is Business and Community? We are the Prince's Responsible Business Network. We were established nearly 40 years ago by HRH, the Prince of Wales. We are a membership organisation consisting of approximately 600 members who are mostly in the FTSE 350. So we predominantly engage with larger corporates. When members join us, they commit to being responsible businesses and engaging with us to improve their own responsible business and advocate others to be responsible businesses as well. We inspire, engage and challenge our members to tackle some of society's biggest issues. And to that end, we're actually a multi-campaigning organisation. So we cover a whole diverse range of issues. Some of those issues very broadly are to do with creating a skilled and inclusive workforce for today and the future, to innovate, to repair and sustain our planet. And you'll probably be pleased to know that we're quite involved with the COP26 discussions at the moment, and we're very much advocating for our members to set more ambitious targets to reduce their carbon emissions by 2030. And we do a lot of work in places to support things like the UK government's levelling up agenda, addressing issues like social mobility in places. So some of my observations from the last year, and this is not grounded in research, this is just from me engaging with our own members, but also from watching far too much news over the last 12 months or so. But I think what we've seen is a huge appreciation for supply chain resilience. At the beginning of the pandemic, those of us based in the UK will remember that many of our retailers struggled to supply some of the foods that we rely upon due to breakdowns in international supply chains. We also saw panic buying from people worried about having to stay at home. And yet our retailers were able to overcome this fairly quickly and actually have managed to keep the country fed. And that's still ongoing, even with issues like Brexit affecting some of our supply chain resilience. I think importantly for this conversation and more broadly, we've seen the real importance at the local level of the essential shops remaining open. We've seen local supermarkets, groceries, bakers and pharmacies, just by way of an example, remaining open and providing us all with the food and the products that we need to be able to live our lives. But we've also seen those same shops open up delivery slots, for example, to vulnerable customers who are either elderly or had to shield for some reason, and making their services continue to be available to those who otherwise would have been marginalised. And I think even though they're shut at the moment, we've seen the real importance for community resilience of non-essential shops, the coffee shop where you might go to meet your friend, or the gym, which is so important, not just for physical health, but for people's mental health as well. And I think when those shops begin to reopen, we'll all begin to realise that actually it's our local networks that have really kept communities going, and it will be so important for building our future resilience to make sure we continue to engage with friends, family and the wider communities. More broadly, and looking more nationally, in fact internationally as well, I think we recognise that the business sector has had a huge responsibility in terms of keeping things going. The logistics behind getting products into shops has never been more critical as it has with COVID-19. We've also seen the news and communications being so important for keeping us updated with the latest with COVID-19 and other newsworthy bulletins. And also for those of us like me working from home, the importance of technology, and we've seen some huge and fast improvements even in the last 12 months to keep us all connected and to keep more people in jobs who would have otherwise potentially have lost jobs due to the pandemic. And with that, we've seen innovation at the scale we've probably not seen for about 100 years. And we've seen that both with small businesses, but also much larger businesses. There's many an example of a gin distillery becoming a manufacturer of hand sanitizer, but there's been so much more innovation as well. And it's been because it's been a necessity, but I think we can learn from this for future issues as well. So if businesses can react quickly to COVID-19, there's nothing stopping them in reality to react a bit quicker with the climate change issues we're facing. We've also seen that employment is so important. The private sector provides about 80% of jobs across the UK, and we're seeing unemployment becoming a huge issue. And with that, there's a rise in mental health issues, and people's own personal security reduces. So it's really important that we, as everybody, support the private sector to keep jobs open, to keep people more resilient in their own personal lives. And from my own perspective, I've really, truly seen collaboration from the private sector to a degree I've never really experienced before, and businesses wanting to do things together with others to address the needs of communities, both at the local level, but also nationally as well. Moving on to what business and community has done, we established over a year ago now our National Business Response Network, which was based upon about 10 years of experience of responding at a much smaller scale emergencies. And what we did was tap into all of our networks to understand what the needs are at the local community level. So that would be engaging with local authorities and also charities that we are aware of at local level, and then matching those needs to business support. We are privileged at BITC that we are a UK-wide organisation, but we also have lots of networks of businesses at both the national, regional and local levels. And so we're able to use that to our advantage and provide support which is appropriate to the type of requests that we're getting from local communities. We've had all sorts of requests in the early days. So this time last year, we had a number of requests for food. Many people were really worried about getting food to vulnerable adults and children. And we also had lots of requests for technology as schools were shutting and then people were being asked to stay indoors. People realised actually being connected is so important to be able to continue to live life and to access education and friends and family. As we've progressed throughout the year, we've seen more requests around skills, professional services and so on to support charities with their day-to-day functioning. And also we're getting more requests from small businesses around different business topics, including financial support, business continuity and sales and marketing, just to name a few examples. We've been able to take requests for support on our platform, which we built within 48 hours, which was quite remarkable really at the time. And as a result of funding that we got from our initial founding partner, AXA, we were then able to get more funding in, which has enabled us to continue to provide this support for the foreseeable future. So our response to COVID-19 has become a main priority for BITC as we continue to respond to the pandemic. Just to give you a few examples, three here, but we've had all sorts of different types of matches being made. We had AXA creating an app for Safer Wales. We've had companies helping people get connected to the internet in the Highlands and Scotland. And in Northern Ireland, we had PwC providing some of their own workforce to help man the helpline for citizens' advice there. A more recent example I can give you is that Virgin Media helped us to provide over 1,000 devices to young people so that they could continue to access their education. As you can see here, our beneficiaries are incredibly diverse. It's been a wonderful result of our network is that we've been able to help many different types of organisations to help their own beneficiaries. And although it says here 3,800 matches, that actually equates to over 1 million people supported by the businesses in our network. But as you can see, there's over 500 current requests. The needs are ongoing. We get requests every day from organisations seeking help, and we are continuing to try to match those requests to business support. So if you're wondering what you can do to be part of this, if you are a business on the call, we are open to all offers of support from businesses. You're welcome to upload offers through our platform, www.mbrn.org.uk, or you can send an email or a call. The offer of support you can provide can be as much or as little as you'd like for as long as you would like, and it can be anything that you want it to be. It can be volunteering, you could provide a laptop. It's entirely up to you what offer of support you can like to give. If you're on the call and wondering if you can request support, then I'd probably say absolutely you can. You can use the same website to request support as well. And behind the scenes, my colleagues are doing all sorts of matching to match the request to the business offers that we have coming through. I just also wanted to raise your attention to the voluntary and community sector. This is a partnership in the UK dedicated to trying to ensure greater collaboration between voluntary and community sector in emergencies. I highly recommend you check out their website, and they also provide support to communities in need as well. So another place for you to go in case if you're looking for that additional support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. I think, Hannah, you said that we've seen innovation on a scale not seen for 100 years during COVID, and I can't agree more. The transformation that we've seen of the ways in which organisations have been working, whether those are local government organisations, Blue Lights, or businesses in the community, has just been extraordinary. We've seen it at the individual level as well, of pop-up Facebook groups of individuals doing things that they would never normally be able to do. And whether it's your own organisation building its own platform in 48 hours and that sort of innovation, or just people completely changing the way in which they do business, it's been extraordinary to see. And I guess one of the challenges moving forward is the extent to which some of those things are retained and some of those things are rolled back as part of recovery planning, and thinking about what the more ambitious renewal looks like beyond the immediate aftermath of COVID. So thank you very much again, Hannah. I'm just looking towards the chat function, and there's lots of comments in the chat. I'm just going to pick up on one or two just to get us started, and that'll give me a bit of time to read the others that have just been coming in. Fernando and Suu-Va, I think the first question is for you. Fernando, obviously you're a ministry, a national ministry, who are deploying volunteers. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how those volunteers work with existing statutory organisations, so police and fire. So how do your volunteers work with them? What sorts of relationships do those two parties have, please? And I'll ask the same question to Suu-Va in a moment about Cert volunteers. But what's the relationship like?
With the institution, no?
But between the volunteers and police, volunteers and fire. Are fire welcoming? Are police encouraging?
Well, we have our volunteer program in HUB. We got a great team in there. We're 12 in our team, and then we have the regional office. They have they encourage permanently the work with volunteers in all regions. So they promote different kind of activities that we made for youth, and of course when it's an emergency or a disaster, we respond with the coordination with the government emergency institution. We have a platform too, which connect our institution and our offer of activity with young people. This is a new platform we launched last year, of course, with the pandemic. So the volunteer, we have to adapt it for the pandemic situation, of course. And we started to make more remote activities. For example, Suu-Va is here, and with the ONEMI, the government emergency institution, we have a work with them, making the Cert for youth. So we promote the Cert with volunteers of organization in all the country. And last year we made 15 Cert for youth, and this year we are trying to doing but presential. So we have different kind of activities, and of course the most important for us is to develop in youth the skills and competencies for the future jobs, for the future, to build a better future for the country, of course. And why not they have a civil social commitment. So that's our role with youth in our institution.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you very much. Suu-Va, I wonder if you'd like to add something from a Cert perspective.
Yeah, so how well public safety or local government works with a Cert program really depends on that individual public safety agency, that jurisdiction. It really depends on who is managing the incident and whether they have had good experiences working with volunteers or poor experience working with volunteers. It can depend on the size of the incident and whether there's enough government safety agency or personnel to manage a disaster, or they need more people to come in. And typically they would prefer to have Cert volunteers over spontaneous volunteers because they're a trained quantity. They belong to a program, and typically they can manage them through a supervisor through the program. Where if you have just community members, now you have to get a volunteer coordinator and manage them on a full-time basis. For the programs that do utilize Cert, the one good practice is that they actually do disaster simulation and invite public safety to be part of those exercise drills, so they can see firsthand what Cert is capable of, what their training is like, and they actually will meet the public safety, the fire personnel, the police personnel that will interact with them during a disaster, and they build those relationships and build those kind of functions.
Thank you both. I think it's absolutely clear if you have a trained volunteer, then they're worth their weight in gold and can really contribute. And so both of you are developing those sorts of capabilities where the volunteers are known to you, and through Inhoove it might be more of a spontaneous program, but still there's training there that underpins that. Hannah, I wonder if I could ask a little bit about what happens when the offers that you get exceed the demand for those offers. If you've been in that situation in BITC, certainly for Suu-Va and Fernando's benefit, we've obviously during COVID we had so many volunteers come forward, not able to deploy them all. And I'm just wondering, Hannah, if in BITC, if you had some offers of support that you weren't able to use, and how you dealt with perhaps the disappointment of the people who weren't able to contribute it, or whether that wasn't an issue.
It's a really good question. We've never had offers exceed the number of requests at this point, which is unfortunate, but we have had cases where we've had offers on our platform for a long time because we've simply not been able to match them to community requests. And that's, I think, a really important note, because we are trying to be needs-led. So it's really important that we're trying to meet the needs of the community and not trying to impose things upon people. That said, we have made some matches many months after the offer was uploaded, and it's just right that the request came through much later on. So I would urge everyone to place offers on the platform. Whether or not it's used immediately, that's not up to me, but hopefully we'd come to it at some point.
Of course. Absolutely. And Suu-Va, Fernando, have you been in situations where you have had volunteers who were wanting to be active, who were wanting to get involved, but the needs of the incident just haven't required it? Or do you not have those situations?
Yeah, so during a disaster, it's funny, people have a psychological response to want to volunteer when they see a disaster happen in front of them, when they see it covered in the news. Typically, they don't have that urge prior to disaster, so they don't have the training, they're not a known quantity. And sometimes some disasters just are not safe, right? We had an oil spill in California, and with oil spills, you see birds with oil. People in the United States are crazy. They like to save birds. So they will swim. They will go to a beach and swim 3 miles down in the ocean to avoid the blockades. And oil is toxic, right? And so if you're not trained, you have the proper equipment, you can't just let people go in and start saving birds and putting oil all over their hands. But volunteers, if you don't give them something to do, or if you don't at least capture them and let them know that you will contact them when you need them, they're going to do whatever it takes because they think that they are needed, right? So you do want to have a way to manage the volunteers, or at least let them know whether or not there's needs. When people know that there's no needs and you address that, they are better and feel better at staying home. But if they have no information, they're thinking they need me. I just don't see that messaging, and they'll just show up.
Absolutely, yeah. Messaging is absolutely key. Fernando, have you been in the situation where youth have been coming forward and you've been unable to deploy them?
Yes, we have I show you the great fire in Valparaiso. So this was an emergency that we was very difficult to deal with the volunteers and the needs that the community has. So we have to establish an accreditation point, and we have to accredit like 3,000 junks in one morning with, I don't know, volunteers in their computers, accreditation, giving some advices to go up to the hills and help the people, giving insurance, giving the tools to work in the place that have affected. So that was our big experience trying to deal with that. This is so much spontaneous volunteers, no? So after that, we have to create a system for us, like for our institution to deal a better way in that kind of situations.
Thank you, Fernando. Yeah, I remember hearing the stories being described of taking the volunteers up to the wildfires. It's an extraordinary operation. Looking through the chat and just got one eye in time, I'm going to ask each of our speakers just to make a 1-minute closing statement. So just to give you a bit of a preview of that, I would like just to take a very quick question around what could this look like for the UK in terms of what sorts of lessons should we take from the talks today? There's been a lot of talk about in the chat about Cert. There's been about bringing it into the UK, and I see Andy Fry. Thank you, Andy. He's made a comment about a Cert. A group that are calling themselves Cert, and so the sorts of work that can be done. So I'd like us to spend the next couple of minutes just going around each of the speakers. Suu-Va, may I start with you, just because of that comment on Cert in the UK. It's one of the key things that the team at Manchester are very keen on in terms of learning what works outside and bringing that into our thinking in the UK. What lessons do you think we should be taking for community resilience, for local resilience capability?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is there's so many different types of programs and the levels that you can engage volunteers and the opportunity to train your community members. While CERT is structured in the 20 hours and the 8 main topics, you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to leverage the training, how often you want to do the training, who you want to target also for the training. The CERT community, program managers, instructors, they are a very giving community. They love talking and sharing, and they're more than happy to help their neighboring programs. If you want more presentations, I have an unlimited list of program managers who are more than happy to talk for 30 minutes, 1 hour, do presentations, do online training, and they are willing to sacrifice their own time to do that. The second thing I want to mention is don't underestimate the what volunteers are willing to do, right? And what a great asset they can be. A lot of programs, they think, oh, people are not going to want to do this. I've had people come up and thank me and cry because they are allowed to hold a stand and a sign that says, do not enter. So basically doing traffic control, standing in the heat for hours, and just are so happy that they got the opportunity to be part of a disaster. I had people take time off of work during Christmas break to drive 600 miles through the state of California so they can clean pet cages and feed dogs, right? That was the activity they had them do, and they did that. They took time off work, losing money they could be making to do these kind of activities. So don't underestimate that and what people are willing to do.
Great advice. Thank you. Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear, Suu-Va, that there's people willing to train online and provide that training. And maybe that's something that we can do through this project, is to make those links between people who are willing to give and almost a platform similar to what BITC are offering, but people who are willing to give that training and people who might be interested in receiving that training. And so if there are people who are listening, then please do feel free to get in touch. I think David's put the email addresses in the chat, and we can certainly try and facilitate that to make efficient use of time. Thank you very much, Suu-Va. Fernando, from the ministry perspective, what lessons do you think that we should be drawing into the UK on this topic?
I think with the community of volunteers, the most important is to be prepared and training. So I think it's the better way to be resilient and encourage the young people is to build a future. That is very important. So you invest a social tools and skills in there, and of course you're going to build a better country for the future. That I think is the most important, and the other is to cultivate the ecosystem of volunteer organizations. So they have the responsibility to save the volunteers, to guide their work, and to make a responsible work in the territories and the communities.
Thank you, Fernando. And just to add something that you said in your presentation, with youth as a protagonist of change, which really resonated. I really liked that line of saying that youth can be at the forefront of this, not always in the background, but let's put them in the foreground as well. Thank you very much, Fernando.
Yes, Duncan, because the institution have to trust to the people, have to trust to youth. And I think that is very important tips to create a relationship with the government institution and the people.
Thank you, Fernando. Absolutely. Hannah.
So very briefly, I think we can do more in terms of embracing the whole business sector within policy in response to emergencies, and actually within local emergency plans as well. I think we could start referring much more to how we're going to tap into the business sector, broader than just utility companies. Be willing to ask for support from the private sector. We've seen that they're willing to help. Sometimes they don't know what to do, what support to provide. So if you ask for help, we can go and see if we can find that support from them. And lastly, we can't rest on our laurels. We've got a lot of learnings from COVID-19. Business community is going to be taking this back into our own organisation and thinking how can we do better for the next emergency and be more prepared for the next emergency.
Absolutely, and it sounds like BITC can be a key broker in that relationship between business and the response mechanism. So having sight of what LRFs are doing, I know Hannah, you're obviously well connected into a number of the national committees that are running and different activities there. I'd just like to thank all three speakers for the really valuable contributions that you've made to stimulating our thinking about what this local resilience capability might involve, whether it's the involvement of a wider range of people than we would normally spotlight, so involving youth very closely, training our community groups, remembering the very important role the businesses have had during COVID and not losing any one of those three groups, and really, as I say, putting spotlights on all of those. I'd like to really thank speakers. I'd like to thank you for your contributions during the chat function. It makes it much easier for me, rather than having to come up with questions, just to be able to pick off the great questions that you've got. Suu-Va has made some very clear offers. Hannah, you've made some very clear offers as well. Thank you very much to both of you for those. If anybody would like to take up those offers, then please do get in touch. I would also like to maybe put up a last slide, if one of the team's able to do that. We have other seminars coming up as part of the CSRC series that we're running. Continuing in April and running through May, June, and then we'll start again after the summer holidays. So I hope that you'll be able to join those. But we are continuing this conversation in terms of how do we build this local resilience capability? How do we make our communities even stronger following COVID, building on some of the great work that's been done during it. So just to close by thanking the three speakers again, very much indeed, and thanking you all for joining us today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Fernando.
Bye, Duncan. Thank you.
It's good to see you.